Hello and welcome to my presentation. The subject matter of my presentation is how sound design creates immersion through the use of varying techniques within a virtual space. During this presentation, I will be exploring different techniques and elements used in sound design, explaining a design methodology, and giving an overview of my stance on which I prefer, traditional video game or virtual reality sound design. The main four elements of sound design, as you can see on screen, are sound effects, Foley sound, dialogue and music. Sound effects are sounds which are unnatural to the listener and are added post-production. What I mean by unnatural is a sound which is not normally found in real life. For example, a monster noise. Or an iconic example would be the lightsaber. Foley is where noise created through the use of props is added post-production to enhance the naturally occurring sound, so that the audience experiencing the scene feels the highest level of immersion possible. You may be thinking that Foley sounds very similar to sound effects, but Foley is solely focused on sound, which are familiar to the audience, such as glass breaking, footsteps, or even rain. Dialogue can be implemented through the use of voice acting and dubbing in games. Voice acting is the act of recording speech, usually from professional voice actors, which is used to communicate the narrative, thoughts and feelings of the characters, world building for NPCs, and potential gameplay mechanics. Dubbing is similar to voice acting, but it is mainly used as a technique to localize content internationally. For example, voicing over a character in a country's native language. For example,
戦いの先へ Go beyond the battle! この道を進むのみ
This is the path of my destiny.
迷いを断つ
Do not hesitate.
強さに限界はない
There's no limit to one's strength.
music, in my opinion, is the most important part of sound design in games, because it plays a unique role where the designer can use it to control the flow of a game, a way to make sure the player knows where to go without constantly hand-holding the player and dragging them down a focused path. Music alone can make a listener emotionally invested in a piece. And speaking of the listener / the audience, I want to now move on to my next slide. The 5-stage interactive design foundation. This methodology was created by the Hansel Plattner Institute of Design at Stanford, and they have named the 5 stages empathize, define, ideate, prototype, and test. This methodology is used to solve problems through the use of understanding the human needs of the audience and then finding a solution, keeping the audience human problems at the forefront of the project. You manage this through the use of a focus group based around what your expected target audience will be. I believe that this methodology is best suited for my project due to the interactivity between the product and the audience. I believe that this will be an effective methodology to use, as I am exploring sound design and how it affects a listener. Therefore, having access to the target audience for testing and questioning makes it very easy to tailor the product to what the audience needs and desires truly are. I shall now be talking about traditional video game sound design, so that I can later go on to compare it to virtual reality sound design. Whilst I was researching my topic, I found this quote which really stood out to me, and I completely agree with it. Many of the most memorable emotional moments I as a gamer come to remember have happened in front of my eyes when I had lost control of the action through a triggered cutscene of varying length. So upon finding this quote, I created this table to list and define the different types of cutscene. I shall now just quickly run through the table. There are cinematic cutscenes, which is where there is no camera control and no player interaction. There are viewpoint cutscenes, where there is camera control but still no player interaction. There is fixed dialogue, where the player must manually progress through the set dialogue. There are QuickTime events, which is where the player must make inputs with the controller to match those that appear on screen to progress through the cutscene. There is stock animations, which are short scenes which are seen repeatedly after a repeatable in-game event. And location discovery cutscenes, which is a short scene which shows off an area, usually happens upon first discovering said location. Now I will be giving just a couple of examples of cutscenes from the table and why I believe the games I have chosen implement sound design well in said cutscene. My example for a cinematic cutscene is DC Universe Online. I will be showing you part of the cinematic once normally and then once again in a more focused manner.
Cyborg, concentrate fire on Luthor while I call down some artillery.
Deathstroke, time for you to join the party.
Come on! We've got lots of murdering to do.
Did you notice that each piece of debris has its own unique sound? Okay, now that I've brought that to your attention, I want you to focus on this piece of debris and try to only listen for its sound. See, that one piece has its own distinct sound within the scene. Each part has its own sense of realism, reflecting the experience of flying debris in real life. Sound effects resonate with a sense of familiarity to really attach to the memory of a player. At this point, you may be thinking that I said sound effects were unnatural sound, which is correct, but they must be laced with reality, otherwise no one will take the piece seriously. And so, I will therefore ensure to include distinctive sound effects within future projects. QuickTime events are scenes in games in which a sequence of inputs is overlaid over the gameplay, enabling the player to interact further with their character. God of War 3 has incredible QuickTime events, but I believe the one which engrosses the player most effectively is the scene in which the player must fight Helios.
My death will not lead you to Zeus.
That is where you are
During the closing moments of the scene, the player must follow a sequence of inputs to enable the character to rip off Helios' head, as seen on the photo on the right. The player must repeatedly mash R1 and L1 in quick succession to achieve this, and the frantic way in which the player has to repeat these inputs almost makes them feel as though they are the ones actually performing the act themselves, giving this physical reaction. The quote on screen helps get this point across. The quote reads, "One of the most important parts of immersion is the physical controls and look of the game. I don't necessarily mean graphics, though they can play a role. I mean the user interface. The feel of the buttons or mouse, the physical connection between player and character." The blend of foley and sound effects used in this scene are very realistic, with the use of the blood and gore enhancing gameplay and the believability of the combat. and the voice performance does a spectacular job of bringing across the pain of the character in such an impactful way that it makes you believe that the actor actually got their head ripped off. I will now be speaking on the sound design which is in place within virtual reality. Virtual reality headsets immerse a user through the use of binaural sound. The quote on screen reads, "Binaural sound is stereo audio that is recorded through a dual microphone setup. The goal of recording binaural sound is to create a 3D audio effect that simulates sound as if it's being heard live." Binaural sound within virtual reality takes full advantage of sound sources in motion to immerse the player as seen in the diagram on the right. Sound sources in motion are objects which create sound, but the volume of said sound will change depending on the distance between the source and the user. An example of this would be a car in motion. As the car gets further away, you hear it less, whereas where it comes closer to you, it sounds louder because the distance is much shorter, meaning the source of the sound is closer to your ear. The VR game Half-Life Alyx is incredible in all aspects of sound design. The game environments are realistic and lifelike, with everyday sound that mimic real life, such as light static, buzzing, and water dripping. During my time playing the game, I found a particularly enjoyable element is picking up a simple glass bottle and dropping it, as the realistic sound is incredibly rewarding for the player and really helps to transport them into the world of the game. This simple part takes complete advantage of binaural sound, with the sound source being the bottle and the motion of throwing/dropping the bottle affecting the realism of the noise the player will experience. Through the use of sound design, the game rewards both players that would follow the linear path by letting them know they're on the correct path through sound cues, and players who like to take their time and explore, and who are subsequently rewarded with new environmental sounds. The quote on screen is from one of the game's sound designers, Dave Feisey. Areas that players would blitz through in an ordinary game suddenly became interesting corners to explore in VR. It was really important to me that those players would be sonically rewarded for taking their time. That quote is really interesting to me, because it helps back up the methodology which I have chosen to use, because through the use of watching people play your game, you get feedback and unique situations that you wouldn't expect. Like, you can't predict what audiences are going to like or what they're going to interact with or how they're going to behave. So that's why I believe having that focus group on hand at pretty much all times would be very effective during my project. I have come to the conclusion that I must use the 5-stage interactive design foundation methodology to acquire findings based around my audience's needs and wants. This design methodology is most suitable for a sound design based project due to the high levels of interaction between the creator, myself, and the target audience/focus group. Through the use of a focus group, a creator is able to discover the pros and cons of the project without their own bias being involved in any way. My research suggests that despite the fact that video games use a range of different elements of sound design in an effective way, virtual reality sound design is the more immersive medium due to the use of binaural sound. Virtual reality games are able to take all the elements from traditional video games, but can enhance them through the use of binaural audio to truly immerse the player in a virtual space. I believe that the key to good sound design is realism, and I believe that through the use of binaural sound and virtual reality graphics, this can be achieved in a better way than any video game could traditionally do. Virtual reality sound design is an evolutionary step up from traditional video game sound design, and that's because within virtual reality the key front is immersion, be it graphically or through the audio, but either way there is a reason that reality shows up within the name of virtual reality. They are making worlds for players to live in and experience time and time again.